My sister and I were both 16 and 13. We were home alone while my parents were out of state for a couple of days to attend the funeral of a longtime family friend. Our grandfather lived only a couple of miles away and was originally supposed to babysit us, but he trusted that my sister and I would be fine on our own. Instead, he would be on call if anything were to go awry. It was around 10 p.m. on the second night of being alone. I was upstairs in bed trying to sleep after a long day of biking around with a couple of friends. Suddenly, my sister came sprinting up the stairs, which she almost never did unless she was in a hurry for whatever reason. She came into my room and was frantically speaking to someone on the phone. I laid there in confusion while she talked. I don't remember exactly what was said, but once she hung up, she hugged me tight and told me that everything was all right and Grandpa was on his way. Suddenly, we heard what sounded like a door being kicked open downstairs. Almost immediately afterward, we began to barricade my bedroom door. None of the bedroom doors in the house had locks on them at that time. Once we were done, she looked out the window while I sat there, covering myself with a blanket. All the while, we could hear footsteps downstairs, walking about on our hardwood kitchen floor. My sister urgently looked around my room and asked if I had a bat or anything we could use to defend ourselves. I did. Stored in my closet was my Louisville Slugger that I used when my parents made me play baseball when I was in elementary school. I also had a hockey stick in there, but who would use that as a weapon unless in a very circumstantial situation? She rummaged through my closet and grabbed my bat, then stood next to the door while I ducked down behind her. I thought maybe I should grab that hockey stick, but it was very unwieldy for me, unless the burglar had some sort of peds associated with hockey. This was not going to be a very effective weapon for me. We then heard the sound of a gunshot, followed by a man screaming out in pain. The sound of both I can still hear even to this day when I just think about it hard enough. My sister and I were standing by the door, almost in tears, when about a minute later, we hear our grandfather yell out our names, asking if we were all right. We both yelled out simultaneously that we were. My sister and I pulled the dresser and various other objects out of the way of my door, and we both went out into the hallway. We could hear my grandfather on the phone with 911 as we stood at the top of the stairs. When the police and the ambulance arrived, the man who had broken in was taken out on a stretcher, which I later learned was for a shot to the abdomen. My grandfather had come into the same back door and found the man in our kitchen, searching through drawers. He then came at my grandfather with one of our kitchen knives, and that's when he was shot. The man almost died from blood loss, but he ended up surviving. I really hope he learned his lesson both through being incarcerated and by being shot in the abdomen and almost losing his life. But of course, you never know with certain people, especially the infamous ones. There's a convenience store that I go to nearly every single day. I walk there, so I do it not really to get anything, but because it's a pretty good midday walk to get a bit of exercise. It keeps me going. You know, getting up to do something every day. There's a guy I know who is homeless now, but I only assumed it in the first few times I met him. He often hangs out right outside that convenience store. There's a shady little spot in the front next to the propane tanks that has an outlet. I guess the managers of the store allow him and one or two other homeless people in our small town to use that outlet in order to recharge their phones. Well, anyway, he had stopped me in front of this store to talk a few times, although I couldn't really understand everything he was talking about. I had been homeless once before for a short time. I know what it's like to not have anyone you can talk to, so I let him talk a whole lot to me while I worked as a good sounding board. Just recently, he decided to get up and walk with me as I was on my way home from the store. He suggested that I should walk a different way instead. I had told him before the area in which I lived, and apparently, there was a road that went behind the stores and came out behind another street, which was close to my home. He told me he would show me how to get to the trail he was talking about. The weirdest part, though, is that he didn't walk with me all the way to where the trail was. He walked as far as the train tracks and then just pointed me the rest of the way. And actually, he was right. It was a much, much quicker path to get to the way I was going. it was also a lot more shaded and solitary than walking along the busy highway. I found myself enjoying it quite a bit, actually. I would take that way a few times in the day, not really thinking too much about it. It was when I decided to take it once at night, though, that I had a really scary experience. I hadn't stopped to really think about what it might be like to walk back there at night. The actual path was really short, and most of the walk was along a paved road. There were a few homes along the road, so I assumed there would at least be some street lamps alongside as well. Well, when I crossed over from the little path to the asphalt road, needless to say, I was surprised at first by just how dark it was. Yeah, it was really darker than anything I could ever recall in my life. Like I mentioned, there were a few houses along the road, but they didn't seem to have any lights on at this time of night. In fact, there were absolutely no lights on at all, not on any of the telephone poles even. This meant it was a downhill walk that was nearly pitch black outside. I couldn't even really make out where I was going forward, trying to watch the ground to see where I was going. For some reason, at the time, it never occurred to me to just turn around and go back. I wanted to get through walking that way, and I just figured after, I would take the rest of the normal way home. After a few moments, it occurred to me to use the flashlight on my cell phone. Sure, it wasn't the best light there could be, but it did help me find my way a little bit better than without. I couldn't really see what was on the sides of me or anything behind me either, but it was enough to keep me from stumbling on or even off the road. Suddenly, though there was some noise off to the left side of me, I jumped and tried to shine my light over in that direction. Because the light was so weak, I wasn't able to make out what was off to the side. I could see, though, that there was some sort of figure stumbling in a weird gait toward me. He was saying something like, "Give me that. Give me that." I didn't need to make out who or what it was in order to run, though. I took off like a rocket down that hill without even looking back once. I ran and didn't stop until I made it to the store. When I went in, I was startled, and the cashier could tell something was wrong. While catching my breath, I explained what happened. When we went outside, though, that person had completely disappeared into the darkness. I guess whoever it was didn't decide to follow me in the end, but it sure was creepy as hell having them come after me in the dark like that. I started my freshman year of college at a university in my hometown that's pretty nice. I'm not going to share too much about it, but it has a smaller amount of students, enough that you don't really run into people too often. Actually, I lived on campus and was only 17 at the time. I had a Tinder, of course, as I was fresh out of a relationship and looking to experience new things in college. I matched with this one boy, Asher, who seemed nice enough at first. Pretty socially awkward, but I never really minded that sort of thing. I have some anxiety issues myself, so I'm pretty sympathetic to it because of that. I ignored a lot of warning signs I probably shouldn't have. We texted for a while, and he seemed really nice and caring. He wanted to know a lot about me, which I wasn't too keen on sharing. I told him the basics, and we texted pretty regularly. Though he lived on campus as well, he invited me to hang out. At the time, things didn't seem sketchy at all, so of course, I was completely down. When I first met him, though, that's when things started to get a bit uncomfortable. We hung out in his dorm at first, which was pretty standard. Overall, I got cozy with him on his couch. I'd say cuddling, but not quite there. When we started talking more, though, I realized that something was a bit off. He kept making comments that would just put me off right away. I tried to ignore them, though. Things like, "I've never cuddled with anyone before." "Sorry if I'm doing this wrong." And so many comments about how he wanted me to stay forever. Weird word choice. But whatever. He was just trying to do his own thing, and I'd let him down easy. I ended that hangout pretty quickly for some fake excuse and went right back to my room. He kept on texting me and professing how much he was into me. I told him sorry, but I'm not really looking for any kind of relationship. I didn't want things to be romantic. It was a bad lie, but I'm very confrontational, and I didn't want to be mean. It's not like he had really done anything wrong. We just didn't really click. Unfortunately, that was just the start of everything. He would not leave me alone after. Even though I kept trying to de-escalate things, I would keep running into him all over campus and other places as well. I wasn't sure how he would always just suddenly manage to be nearby right when my classes ended. I also wasn't sure why we'd suddenly both be in the dining hall at the exact same time, even though I hadn't changed my regular routine at all. I tried to brush it off though. That was definitely a mistake. I ended up turning him down completely eventually because now I was getting creeped out. I couldn't figure out how he wasn't getting what I was putting out, that I didn't want anything romantic with him. He started to really guilt trip me, telling me about how he was going to kill himself and nobody else would ever love him. I'd been in a manipulative relationship in the past, so I recognized that behavior right away and shut it down. I told him I couldn't even be friends with him if he was going to say stuff like that. In my head, that was that. He actually didn't reply for a while, but when he did once more, all hell broke loose. I was luckily out of town at the time for a concert, so that made me feel a lot better. He immediately went off though, paragraph after paragraph about how horrible a person I was. I was such a explicit. He needed to put me in my place. All the regular nice guy things you could think of. I could handle that much though. I just ignored all his nasty words. It seemed though, once the regret set in from him saying all those things, he made it his mission in life to win me over however possible. He apologized profusely, told me he could not stand being all alone, and I was his only friend in the world, whatever. Terrible, but at the moment, I didn't really care about that. To prove his dedication to me though, he did the creepiest thing yet. First, he texted me he was outside my room right now. We did not live in the same dorm building, and you can't get into the buildings unless you live there. I don't know how he got in. At the moment, I was not there, and my roommate was also not home, so at least that much was okay. I texted back at that point and told him to leave. Just how creepy that was. He pulled down his last resort. He sent me screenshots of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you can fill in tons of information and even have a notes section as well. I could see everything was full. He somehow knew my home address, my room number on campus, my parents' and brothers' names, my pets' nicknames, my whole schedule. It was terrifying because I'm a very private person. The only social media I have is my Instagram, and I've never shared a single thing on it about that kind of stuff. I don't think I'll ever find out how he discovered all of this about me. I blocked him on everything right away and reported him to the school as well. Of course, the school did nothing at all. I still see him around on campus and other places as well, and he still tries to approach me whenever he manages to see me. I always duck and run away as fast as possible, and that's worked for me so far. It's terrifying, though, to think what he might do one day.